Hi, I'm Chris Colvin. I'm the host of GCtv, which is a monthly broadcast in which we interview leading general counsel and also senior in-house lawyers at different companies to learn more about their careers and to hear their advice for other lawyers who would like to have similar success in an in-house career. I'm also the founder of In the House, which is an organization which empowers in house lawyers by providing educational, thought leadership, professional networking opportunities, and more. You can learn more about us at www.inthehouse.org. I'd also like to thank our sponsor for GCtv, which is Select Counsel. Select Counsel is a network of more than 300 innovative lawyers who work for law firms that are trying to better align their service offerings with the needs of GCs and other in-house counsel at legal departments. You can learn more about Select Counsel at www.selectcounsel.law. I'm delighted today on GCtv to be interviewing Steve Beede. He's the Deputy General Counsel at Exiger. Okay, thanks for joining us on GCtv. We really appreciate you appearing as a guest.
Well, I'm happy to be here. It's a great idea. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Fantastic. Me too. Why don't we start, if you don't mind, just sharing a little bit about your current role and your current company, and then a little bit about the career path that I guess got you from college through law school through where you are now.
Sure. So I'm Deputy General Counsel for Exiger, which is a financial crimes compliance consulting firm and technology firm. And I'll explain what all that means in a little while as well. As Deputy GC, I handle all corporate law matters, M&A, negotiating contracts, compliance, a wide range of matters, as you might imagine. And I coordinate with our CFO quite a bit, our general counsel, our head of talent and culture, which is what we call HR, IT, and others around the company. So about my career path, and then I'm happy to talk about Exiger more. I went to college at Cornell. I thought I would go to law school. I took a few years off to do different things and then enrolled at NYU Law School, really with no idea what corporate lawyers do for a living at all. So I thought I'd be a litigator. I kind of knew what that involved, and I was for quite a few years at two law firms, and was at Proskauer as a litigator and became interested in securities law issues and less interested in litigation as a career. Fortunately, the partners there let me switch to the corporate department, even though I was about 8 years in. So I retrained myself, worked with quite a few clients at Proskauer, and always made clear to the people I worked with that I was interested in moving in-house. That was something that people were, I think, hesitant to talk to their partners about and colleagues about for obvious reasons. But if that's what you want to do, I think your best source or sources and your best network are the people you work with every day at a law firm like that. And lo and behold, I ended up having the opportunity to become general counsel, the first general counsel for a company called Charter Mac, which was one of the largest clients of Proskauer at that time. So I launched as the first GC for a public company, no staff. I did have a paralegal after a while. I had no idea how absorbing it would be, but I knew it would be a lot of work. It was a lot of fun. And as I think back, stepping into that position and being the only in-house attorney was audacious or maybe not too sensible. But I'm glad I did it. I saw and did quite a few things, from transactional work to M&A related work to all kinds of finance transactions, and of course all the public company and securities law issues that you'd expect to see at a situation like that. So at a certain point in time, Charter Mac, which was in real estate finance with a focus on multifamily affordable housing, hit the financial crisis and vice versa, and was reorged. And ultimately, I was out of a job for about 2.5 years. I worked in-house in different short-term positions and did lawyering as a solo practitioner, and then ended up approaching the general counsel of Exiger, who I knew from law school, Dan Alonso. And we talked about what his role would be as the first GC for a startup company at that time. He is a former prosecutor, a very senior former prosecutor and litigator. And we talked quite a bit about what the corporate law part of his position would involve and how absorbing that would be. Dan also is a managing director of Exiger and services clients and advises clients at a very high level and brings in quite a few clients. So the discussions kind of went along, and I ended up signing in as sort of outside inside counsel, and that evolved to a full-time position at Exiger and eventually the title of Deputy General Counsel. So now it's full-time and has been for about 3 years. The company has grown very rapidly, and it's very interesting, and I'm really enjoying it. That early critical experience of being the first GC at a company, a public company, was incredibly useful, although Exiger is private, because I got to do a lot, see a lot, and was sort of ready for a role where you're asked to do quite a few things. And I thought quite a bit about how to plan a legal department from the ground up, and so that's been that was a helpful exercise to go through, and we're still working on it. Of course, it's probably the most challenging part of the job.
Right. There's so many interesting narrative strands in what you just shared. Let me just pick up on a couple of them. One thing that's really fascinating to me is your experience at two things. Your experience at Proskauer, switching from a litigator to a corporate lawyer, which is, I don't think, a very common change. And I also think what you talked about what I call internal networking, which is working, talking to the peers in your own organization about your career objectives and eliciting their support, even if it feels a little bit uncomfortable. In your case, essentially saying you wanted to leave someday and go in-house. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that worked for you. How did you get started with that? Would you advise others to try it? And did it in fact play an instrumental role in getting you your first in-house counsel opportunity, namely the fact that you had shared with your colleagues your career objectives in terms of going in-house?
Well, it did. It did. After being a litigator for 8 or 9 years and not really enjoying it that much, I actually went to the head of the litigation department and said, I've become increasingly interested in securities law and corporate law matters, and maybe I missed the boat. Maybe I should have been a corporate lawyer. And what do you think about the idea of approaching our clients to see whether they'd be interested in taking on somebody like me and sort of letting me train on the job as a litigator and making the transition to being an in-house corporate attorney? The firm had other ideas. It was around the time of the internet boom, and there just weren't enough corporate associates around. The market was very tight. There was a lot of work, and just my timing was lucky. The partners said, just move from litigation to corporate, and we'll retrain you, and we'll see about that in-house work someday, right? And so I did that, and I ended up staying another 8 years or so. It's almost biblical as I think about it. But they knew I was interested, and ultimately, one of the clients grew large enough. It broke off from its parent company and grew, and they needed somebody to step into that coordinating role of being the first in-house counsel. And they were fine calling me the general counsel, and I was off and running. But the networking part was important. I always worked for quite a few partners and talked to them openly about what I wanted to do, and it worked out.
That's great. My hat is off to you for being brave enough to share what could be a challenging career objective, especially for someone who'd been at more than a decade at a big firm. That's really takes some guts to do that. I'm also quite interested in, and this is a common theme I see with other GCs. You had to go through some interesting career transitions, including being a solo practitioner for a while, including being an outside, it sounds like either a fractional or an outside general counsel for a client. And that's, that seems to be a trend that I'm seeing, but you seem to have been there earlier than some. And I think that kind of flexibility is a little scary for lawyers who are maybe not naturally somewhat risk averse, and that's maybe one of the reasons we chose this career path. What advice do you have for others who may be looking at an in-house career that they thought would be maybe more linear, but they find there's more twists and turns than they anticipated?
Well, I think those twists and turns, as it turns out, are a good thing. I had sort of a sheepish attitude about the fact that I shifted corporate departments and did different things, and I was in one industry, then another industry, and this and that. But all those different types of experiences actually were helpful. You develop a certain flexibility intellectually, and you don't get flustered if something new is put in front of you. And the more you see, the more you can sort of infer what you ought to do in a new situation. And so I don't think a linear path is necessarily the best for being an in-house counsel at a place where you don't know what you'll be asked to do from hour to hour, minute to minute. There's always something new on the horizon, which is both fun and a little bit daunting and all of that. I have no idea what it's like to be in-house counsel at a very large organization like a financial institution. I've only worked for two mid-sized companies and with a brief stay at a somewhat larger interactive entertainment company. But in the positions I've been in, whatever experience I've had, ultimately I've drawn upon. And it was good to have a lot of different things to have done.
That's great. So you've spent a lot. It's interesting that you spent a really substantial amount of time as an outside lawyer at a big firm, and now you spend a substantial amount of time in-house. So I'm interested in hearing, and you, by choice, you made a decision. I want to go in-house. You worked towards it. You networked towards it. And you achieved your goal. So having now achieved your goal, is there anything? What things I guess surprise you now that you've landed the GC and now the senior deputy GC role?
Well, I'm always surprised by how at companies that are expanding or very entrepreneurial, it's just sort of expected that you'll do anything and everything, right? So that's interesting. I was surprised by the fact that you end up operating in a quasi-operational role, not quite, but the CFO never has enough time to do all the things he needs to take care of. So he brings in-house counsel, and you end up developing a close relationship, usually with the people in finance. The CEO has an idea, and suddenly you're in the room, and sometimes you're providing legal advice or reviewing documents, doing the traditional lawyer's role, but sometimes you're sort of helping everything happen. You're part of an operational team. So that was surprising to me. And also, I've worked as hard here as I worked at Proskauer. Right? I've worked as hard at other in-house positions as I worked at Proskauer. That was a little bit surprising, and maybe that was my choice to a certain extent, but I think that it helped me be more successful than I would have been if I had a more of a 9-to-5 attitude. And I think there are maybe those in-house shops out there, but not with the kinds of companies I've worked for.
Right. So maybe disabuse some of our viewers if they think it's going to be easy street when they go in-house, they may have another thing coming.
Right. Right. What's great about it, there are a lot of things that are great about it, and maybe this is just my personality, but I like being part of one team, not many teams, which is often the case when you're at a law firm or you have many clients, all of whom don't really care about each other's deadlines and that sort of stuff. Here, you're working toward a common goal. You're working toward building value in the company, which is an upside that you don't have at a law firm. And if you like business and you like seeing the twists and turns and the development of a business, this is really where it's at. And that all is very interesting. Invariably, something happens that people are disappointed about or they see as a challenge. And, they adopt, they move on, they rebuild, they figure out another way, and that was very interesting to see, that sort of flexibility and resilience that business people or executives have.
Do you have any advice in terms of the skill sets that contribute to success at a law firm? Do you have any advice about what new skills may be developed, and maybe any observations on the, I guess, the political differences between the way a law firm operates and the way a legal department operates, and maybe some advice for people that might want to follow your lead and go from that law firm environment to the corporate environment?
Right. Well, in terms of skills, it's good to be comfortable with numbers. Some people go into law school, maybe a lot of people going to law school really aren't. I had no accounting background at all, for example, and I'm not saying you need to have an accounting degree before you go to law school, not at all, but take a couple of courses, become more familiar with what a balance sheet is and some of the financial accounting concepts, just so you are, speak the same language and don't have to stop and relearn all those things that the people around you really already know. And just be generally curious about the business world. Reading the Wall Street Journal and kind of knowing what's going on is very important in general. Politically, I don't know if there are big differences. In every place to succeed, you need the people who are senior and well positioned to like you and like your work and be willing to champion you as you move on.
Right.
And it's as important in-house as it is at a law firm.
That is such good advice. I think some people, when they go in-house, and maybe in particular people that do it at a somewhat earlier point in their career, they might think that they're done with office politics. And I think it's important that they understand that the politics may seem a little, maybe sometimes kinder and gentler, but they're, I think, maybe sometimes more complicated in a company, and so people
Yeah,
would do well to keep their radar attuned and try to pick up on the types of mentoring relationships and other types of relationships that help them at the law firm. They may look a little different in a company, but I agree with you, they're still very, very important to long-term success.
right. Every place has a tone, as we all know. And some of them are quite different from the law firm world, where I think to a certain extent the partners try to keep out of sight the issues they may have with each other. And one partner I worked with used to refer to it as partner infallibility. You never criticize another partner to a mere associate. Whereas in an office situation, it's more, like what you're familiar with in other parts of your life, even school, where people are just, around talking in halls and, there are politics, of course, and people are very competitive, and that's just the way it goes. And none of these jobs are secure. You sort of have to, accept that fact that through no fault of your own, a
Right.
financial crisis might lay waste to the industry you're working in for a while, or a new CEO gets appointed and he doesn't like the color of your socks or something like that. I'm
Right.
not saying it's always chaotic, but that can happen. This idea that someone would move in-house and have you definitely have a more manageable life, and you learn how to make it more manageable as you go along than a law firm life. But it's not easy either.
Well, one of the things we try to encourage in the house is to always network, both internally and externally with peers, because especially at companies, you really don't know when that day will come, because an M&A deal can be put together with shocking rapidity sometimes, and you may
Hmm.
need to be looking very, very soon at any time in your career. So I think that's excellent advice. Let's
Right.
shift gears a
I
little
just
bit.
wanted
Oh,
to
yeah.
I just wanted to make one point. I totally agree with your, views on networking, and especially earlier in my career when I was the only in-house attorney, uh, going to in-house counsel events and just hearing what other people had to say, you know, uh, when they felt like they could speak frankly and all that, helps you understand the situation you're in, feel less isolated, feel less like, is it me or is everyone going through this? And, it's very important. Aside from the learning, which you should always do, unfortunately, you have to keep reading and learning and teaching yourself.
Right, and sometimes you can be even I guess ironically, somewhat, you can sometimes be even more open with people outside of your organization, because I think in-house lawyers are often viewed as the answer people, and they don't want to show too much vulnerability when they don't know something. It's much better to go to a peer at another company and bone up on an issue that you maybe haven't dealt with, and get the
Right.
perspective of an in-house lawyer who had a different experience. So I think that's incredibly valuable on the job, in my own opinion. And that's my advice to in-house lawyers, is to make sure that they're networking at both the internal level and with their peers in other companies. Let's switch gears just a little bit. Many of our viewers, that especially those that may be at a law firm and have not had an extensive in-house counsel experience, may not really know exactly what a GC or a senior deputy GC does day to day. And obviously that can vary between different companies. But I'd love to hear a little more depth. What is your typical day, if that's even an applicable term, look like, and what is the sort of type of task and the variety of tasks that you have to deal with day in and day out?
Right. That's a really difficult question, because it's very difficult to characterize a typical day except in very general terms. We're a global operation. We have offices in Singapore, Hong Kong, London, two in Canada in different time zones, and on the East Coast. So I often will get up at 6 in the morning and start answering emails. It's not always like that, but the people in Hong Kong, where we have a smaller office, in Singapore, truly appreciate that kind of responsive behavior. And if you think about it, a whole day can pass if you're not on some of those emails early enough or at the right times. So every day there's a stream of contracts to deal with. I have a very strong associate who deals with that uh, very ably. But sometimes issues come up of kind of first impression among people. Can we do this? And sometimes the business development staff approaches you and they really want to push the envelope and sell services in regulated areas that require some thought. We have an active program of looking at potential targets uh, for expansion. And so I get a steady stream of materials in that part of the business. And compliance is a huge issue, as I'm sure you know,
Right.
for any company, let alone a global company, let alone a company that deals with information and transmitting information. So we have an AI unit that is developing a revolutionary product that does due diligence on individuals and entities to a very deep and useful level. Um, that will replace quite a lot of man hours. That's one hugely complex area. We have a business that does manual due diligence reports in depth with an expert staff, and we have subject matter experts who are significant former prosecutors and FBI agents and such, who handle the design of entire financial crimes compliance systems and help our clients respond to regulatory inquiries and investigations. So there's a lot going on. So it's very difficult to characterize a particular day. But sometimes an issue comes along and that's your day. You have to get to an answer, coordinate with in-house counsel, do some research yourself, and get to the point where you can reasonably present on an issue. So I could go on and on. It doesn't seem like there's a typical day.
Yeah.
What I'm really focusing on now is an area where the lawyers are not supposed to be good at, which is project management. And talking to people here who are good at it. As the company expands, we now have multiple longer term projects, and we have the same staff size. So I'm thinking pretty deeply about how you deal with that and how you project the resources you'll need and budget, and just slot in everything that needs to be done. So it's really interesting, and that's another side project that you've got to find quiet time for.
Right, that's interesting. I'm very interested in that topic of legal project management, and I think I've observed a trend over the last 5 to 10 years where that project management role, it seems like in general, there's no every specific is different, but in general, it seems like that project management role is shifting from the law firm, even the large law firm, to the in-house lawyer. And I think that's in my opinion, that's an appropriate shift, because I do think the in-house lawyers, they have so many plates spinning at any one time. They, by hook or by crook, become good managers, process managers, project managers. And whereas at law firms, there's less of a native talent that I think's developed in that space. So I think
Right.
you're on trend, I would say, in terms of developing that skill set and continuing to develop that skill set. Looking back over your years as a GC and as now a deputy GC at a larger company, what are some work habits or skills that you've developed and maybe you'd suggest that other lawyers would do well to develop in order to survive and thrive in the in-house environment?
Right. So this is probably very cliched, but you must get an adequate amount of sleep, right? There are times when you can't, but you have to take care of your body, because you really cannot bring to bear the subtle thinking, the intensive thinking, and the emotional stability that you need to deal with all these projects, all these people, unless you're well rested. I'm also a big advocate of exercising almost every day. Um, Again, a little cliched, but that really helps you deal with stress and feel better about yourself, and that's really important. Other habits, I think, are being available. Checking your email regularly, not really dropping out of sight. Um, Clients love that. On the other hand, it creates an expectation, right? So you have to manage your vacation time um, in a pretty assertive sort of way. Um, Talking to people, as you mentioned, in the halls. There's so much that goes on that tends to reach in-house counsel later than it should,
Right,
because the business people start to develop ideas and start to do what they do. And some of them come from big organizations where they think of in-house counsel as those guys you order around and not part of the team, right?
right,
And some of them think of you as part of the team. But there's always useful information, so you can start to think about something that's developing in the company in terms of business plans or personnel or opening up a new location or something like that. Exiger is great at integrating me into a lot of those meetings and such, but just talking to people is very important. Um, Spending some time every day learning about new legal developments, even if it's just 10 minutes, is really important. So you're not blindsided, for example. Somebody says, hey, what about this new thing? And you have no idea what that new thing is.
right,
So that's become easier to do with resources like Practical Law Company, ACC,
right.
media, feeds and such. Um, and otherwise, probably if you've made it to a position like this, you have pretty decent work habits of just sticking to what you need to stick to.
Let's spend a little bit of time now talking about the area you used to work in as an outside lawyer. And this leads me to what I call my magic wand questions, because I like to think we're at a time of transformation in the legal industry, and we should all be thinking more about our wish list. What do we wish for various components of our practices? So this question is, if you had that magic wand and you could change something about the outside law firm world, about the way they practice, what would your wish list be?
So at Exiger, I've really been lucky. We have great outside counsel. They were in place before I arrived, and when they weren't, management was open to letting legal select great people. And our GC has an incredible network, so we've been able to find great people. And if you don't, you really have a problem. You have to be willing to pull the plug early. Fortunately, that's never happened to me. Um, but you can get into situations, it hasn't happened to me here, where outside counsel has a lot of political pull, and that can make it difficult to manage them, work with them even. And so if I were to wave the magic wand, I would say, you know, outside counsel really needs to respect the role, so that in-house counsel can be successful and help them be successful too. As far as resources, when I started out, it was so difficult to find out about a new topic, right? Some new regulatory issue would come out, and the research involved was significant. Outside counsel often is hesitant to either show they don't know as much as you think they should know, or they're hesitant to school you too much sometimes. That's not the case now with my outside counsel. But with the advent of Practical Law Company, Westlaw resources that are more nuanced, that drill down into forms, that drill down into practice notes, that has been a great turn of events, because you can invest, several $1,000s and really, I think, shed quite a bit of outside counsel time in just learning the basics, the first 2 or 3 levels of a new issue or something somebody wants you to look at. Other than that, I don't really have a great magic wand answer for you. What are you hearing from people that they would love to have
Well, I would
change or be
say,
different? Or
yeah, so that's a good question back to me. What I'm hearing a lot is that law firms should be seriously discussing their business model, and in a real way that has maybe not happened at too many, especially larger firms, and that they need to do whatever they can to better align the way they do business with the way modern legal departments are run. And that means sort of a variety of different things. But I think, I tend to think of it as, I call the in-house lawyers the buy side of the legal services industry. And I think that they're beginning, sort of like their brethren and others in the financial services industry, the buy side is beginning to flex its muscles and to assert some degree of control over how law firms deliver their services, whether that's questioning the billable hour model, or you know, other types of alignments that might better provide what legal departments really need. So I personally think that some big changes are coming, and that law firms would be better off getting ahead of the trends if they can. So that's sort of my view, and I've heard that from a lot of GCs as well. And another suggestion that I often have is for GCs when they ask is, you're actually in the driver's seat. This is your industry. You are the buy side. In the US, it's, I believe, about a $400 billion industry with a B. So there's a lot of legal spending happening, and it's really the purchasers of those services that should be taking the lead when it comes to how they want those services delivered. So if they need to do more RFPs in order to get law firms to give better estimates of what they think things are going to cost, I, for one, think that's a fair question. This is your business, and if you can't give me an estimate for what you think it's going to cost, then maybe I need to talk to some other people that feel comfortable giving me an estimate. So those are
right,
some of
right.
my thoughts. I'd love to hear your views of sort of business model alignment, and if you have any views on sort of how law firms might evolve in the future.
Right. I've read a lot of those materials over the years about alternative billing arrangements and such. And for me, usually they haven't really spoken to me in a way that's useful, to my practice. I've seen some of that. For example, in my prior company, we had a lot of similar transactions that occurred over and over again. So you could work toward a cap or a per deal kind of arrangement. But in a more entrepreneurial situation where everything's different all the time, the best model, I think, is to take in-house absolutely everything you can,
Right.
and use the outside counsel for their incredible depth of strategic legal thinking, and as a standing army to close transactions that will, require a fair number of people and have to happen quickly. Um, yeah, I thought about all these issues, and I have not come up with anything terribly creative. I hate the billable hour model. I think everyone does. Uh, so to the extent you have bargaining power, we always bargain for caps and budgets, and I'm pretty good now at knowing what's realistic. Just having the experience of seeing a lot of transactions helps you, get in there and control costs better. Another thing that I don't like and that I don't let happen is getting the invoice, weeks and weeks and weeks later, and then therefore you're surprised at the pace of legal spend. On a big project, if it's not fixed fee, I'll ask for estimates every week, 2 weeks, because otherwise things can run out of control. And that is really unpleasant for in-house counsel when that happens. I've been lucky, and I haven't seen it, but at Proskauer, I've certainly seen in-house counsel take on the other side of the table,
That is
put you through your
really,
paces.
really excellent advice for outside lawyers. The clients, I learned as a partner, when I was a partner at a big firm, clients hate surprises, and for good reason, because they have to live and die by a budget, unlike their colleagues at law firms. So it's,
Right.
I developed for myself what I called my triple bottom line. I said, it's not enough. Number one, you should prevail from a legal perspective, do well for your client legally, of course, that goes without saying. But you also, secondly, need to think about how is the legal work you're doing serving the objective, the business objective of your client. Identify that business objective, or if you don't know it, ask your client, what is your business objective? So I know that what I'm doing is helping to deliver that. And third, and just as important as the other two is, and you actually alluded to this, how do I make my in-house client contact look good to their boss? This should be a personal success for them. Yeah, and
Right.
they should smell like a rose at the end of the day once this thing is done. And when you have an unusually large legal bill that is unanticipated, does not make, as you pointed out, that does not make the in-house lawyer look good. So
Right. And I worked with outside counsel who had no interest in letting me look good, and others who were great at that. We worked together in a very collaborative way. But yeah, I was always puzzled by this idea that some outside counsel would value their relationship with the CE so much that they really, really wouldn't want to help the in-house counsel they work with every day, look good or at least be part of the team. So, but you can run into those situations. It's tough.
yeah, I can guess who
But
you have the better relationships with over time.
I have all good ones now, so it's great.
Excellent.
The project planning issue always has mystified me. When I was a corporate associate, I was obsessive about my closing agendas and creating them early, updating them all the time. And, I've since learned that's, kind of introductory project management. But a lot of lawyers just, they don't want to do it too early. They view it as sometimes they won't even do it, put together a closing agenda until the very last minute, unless I insist. And I just don't get that because there are so many moving pieces put in place often in these transactions. I need a list. So
Right. So this is some
I don't
good
understand that.
advice for outside counsel. Make your client look good and learn a little bit about project management so you can support their project management efforts. I think that's really excellent advice.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
let's turn the magic wand around a little bit and look at in-house practice a bit. Is there what would you, if you could change, not necessarily the way your legal department operates, but if you could sort of change in general the way legal departments find, recruit, and retain talented lawyers, what are the tools and practices that you would wish for?
Well, I haven't been able to think of any good ones. I think it is a very catch as catch can process. If you put a job application or if you post a position, you get a flood of resumes, and a lot of them can be weeded out, but you end up having to interview quite a few people, and you can pretty instantly tell that a lot of them won't work out or mesh with you. And so there, I think networking is critical too. If you're going to, find talent, you have to know a lot of people and say that you trust, and ask them who they know who's looking, or who they know who's taking a break to raise kids and wants to get back in the market, which is a great resource, of course. It's hard to find. You can't really give lawyers a test. You can't really see their work product in advance in any meaningful way, especially if they're a little more senior or further along. So, you kind of roll the dice. It's interesting. I don't know what you've heard about what people want to do to make that better, but uh,
I
other
have.
than we don't use headhunters. I mean, there are some good ones. That's one alternative.
Right. I found, well, with headhunters, I found, I guess if I could generalize a bit, with headhunters, I found that they tend, I think, for understandable business pressure reasons, they tend to focus on three main areas. That's junior associates that are a few years out and want to switch firms, and that's an easy sort of quick turnover market, I think. Maybe want to make a little more money or find a different, better culture fit. And then the other one is partners with sizable books of business. They want to move them for obvious reasons. And then the very senior in-house lawyers, GC level or very close to GC level at larger companies. I think other than that, for more junior in-house people, and I don't mean very junior, I just mean anyone who's not at that very top level at larger legal departments, it's a little hard, I think, sometimes to justify the headhunter's fee, because there's so many talented people out there. So I think a lot of companies are like yours, where they try to find another way to find such people. There are some good tools. I've found that goinhouse.com seems to be a pretty good tool, and LinkedIn has a pretty good tool for finding candidates. A lot of talented in-house lawyers look at those tools, and you can find them through those tools by posting jobs to LinkedIn or to goinhouse.com. So those are some things I've seen that from the tech side that have emerged in recent years. But I think the real answer is what you pointed out, which is networking. I also have seen a rise, and I think this should be done even more, a rise in secondments. It sounds like you effectively seconded yourself to your first
Yes,
company, which
exactly.
which was brilliant, and it's not done enough in my opinion. I actually think both law firms and lawyers, individual lawyers, and their clients would all be better served by a more robust secondment program, perhaps where the costs of the lawyer are shared, or their salary is shared between the firm and the client. Because I think whether that lawyer goes on to be the GC or a senior in-house lawyer someday, or whether they stay at the law firm, either way, that relationship, there's a huge opportunity for strengthening that relationship between the firm and the client, and
Yeah,
it can really enhance the career of the lawyer. So I think that might be a counterexample. You said you can't really test drive a lawyer. I'm paraphrasing what you said, but that is an example where you can test drive. And the other similar role is basically where people second themselves by being fractional GCs for fast-growing companies, and that's another sort of, the market for that talent is a little chaotic right now, but it's out there. And one of the things we're trying to do it in the house is try to sort of organize that a little bit and get people thinking about, hey, there's this really talented pool of ex-GCs out there or other senior in-house lawyers. And you mentioned child rearing. That's one thing that happens. Another thing is those M&A deals that happen if you're on the wrong end of that deal.
sure.
Sometimes the most
Mm-hmm.
talented people are the ones that take that incentive package and leave because they think they're going to find something else, and they rather take control of their career and wait than wait. And so there's a lot of very talented people out there that might be willing to engage in more flexible relationships and be paid what amounts to half a salary, for example, without benefits, because maybe they have a spouse that has the job with the benefits, or whatever their personal situation might be. I do think that's happening. And I've found, at least in my own opinion, there's some incredibly talented people that are now willing to work on that basis. And so I think that can be a way of really, a bit of, I guess, try before you buy, or lease to own, whatever, pick your
Right,
analogy.
right.
I think those
Mm-hmm.
opportunities
Mm-hmm.
are out there. And then you
Right.
will see their true abilities on the job. And then you'll know what you're getting when you decide, oh, well, would you be interested in coming on full time? And I think that can be a very comfortable switch from that 1099 to the W-2 role. I think it can be it's much appreciated when it happens, I think, on both sides. So that's a little bit of what I've learned in my discussions over the years. Um,
That makes sense. Yes.
let's if I've asked you to talk about law firms and about in-house legal departments. I think another big player these days, or an emerging player, are sort of these legal technology firms that are trying to come up with tools to serve legal departments. And I think we're still, in my opinion, in a somewhat experimental stage with a lot of these products. But I think that companies are trying to understand legal departments and try to create products that might serve directly rather than indirectly by serving law firms. So I'd love to get your general thoughts on technology and what role it plays in legal departments, and then also if you have any specific legal technologies or even more simple, tech hacks, if you will, that you've encountered that you think might be useful to your peers out there.
Right. So there are a range of solutions from information providers, which we use quite a bit, as I mentioned, to online contract platforms. That's absolutely invaluable to a small department that pushes through a lot of contracts. So we use Conga, and they have an e-signature function, and that has just been great for us. So every little bit of time you spend is precious, very valuable. Are you referring to AI solutions like contract review solutions?
It
I've
could be
certainly
that.
seen
Yeah.
a ton of ads for those on YouTube and other places. I haven't really looked into those. I guess I have kind of an old school skepticism about them. Also, I wanted to wait for a point when the company was a little bigger, a little more mature, and I really understood the issues really well and in depth. For a smaller company that does pretty creative things like we do, it can be hard to get your paper adopted by large clients. So then you're looking at, I don't know how you can do a contract review of an MSA from a financial institution with AI yet.
Yeah.
There are programs that I've dabbled with a consultant that, pull out key terms, and that would be useful to a certain extent. But so far, I found that they're focused on M&A type situations, whereas I would like an executive summary of almost every significant provision of our major contracts, and that's either very labor intensive or kind of beyond the capabilities of the AI I've seen so far. But I haven't seen everything because I've really held back from it. I'm a late adopter in that sense. But that I guess would be that would be a great innovation if it worked. If you could run, half your contracts through some sort of AI and have the issues pop up and be comfortable with that. That really cuts against the culture of lawyering that I grew up in, and I think would make my clients nervous as well. Other than that, in the past, I've worked with Serengeti. My prior company had something like 20 law firms that they used regularly, and the bills were, not available. They got lost. The approval workflow was awful until we started to use that solution. We don't really need to do that now at our stage of development here, but I thought that was a great tool at the time I used it, which is already several years ago. I'm sure
Right.
that it's better by now, right?
No, those are great.
We don't have, we don't have, fortunately, litigation to, even mention at this point. We're not a manufacturer involved in lawsuits all over the country, so some of those tools are useful for that kind of outside counsel coordination and case review or case management, but that's not us at this point.
Right, which is a good thing. Just
Oh, it's great.
staying
Yes.
out of litigation is very good for in-house lawyers, I find. So let's talk a little bit. We're approaching the top of the hour, and I'm very sensitive to your busy schedule. Could you share, maybe put away your magic wand and get out your crystal ball a little bit and think about what challenges do you see coming down the pike for general counsel and other senior in-house lawyers, say in the next 5 years or so?
Well, two that I thought about are just the wave of regulatory compliance that is sweeping through the economy and governance. Right now, it all seems to be focused quite a bit on data protection, privacy, personal information, with major sweeping legislation passed in the EU and California and other states eyeing that. And a lot of these approaches are, in a sense, one size fits all. The GDPR really is not tailored to certain situations where you're trying to control, you know, do due diligence on people and make sure that you're dealing with actors who are people you'd want to deal with. You need to be able to investigate people, and that kind of runs counter to some of what I've seen. So, but it's not only that. It's, you could name easily 10 major statutes in the United States, and then if you're in Canada and you're in Hong Kong and you're in other places, it just gets multiplied. So therefore, project management and great outside counsel and all that, and enterprise risk management. You know, it's very important to try to figure out what to prioritize. The other trend that I don't know very much about, but I'm really curious about, is this drive by accounting firms to acquire law practices, and whether that will eventually revolutionize the U.S. law market some years from now. That, I think, would change quite a few things about dealing with law firms and totally shift the balance of power again, you know, because these are larger institutions that know a lot about you, that have key roles in how you do business on the accounting side. And then, you know, kind of along with all that is the erosion of privileges, especially in Europe and other places. And how do you keep that in mind and manage that and all that? Do you need to parachute outside counsel into matters more often to deal with that? And that kind of isolates in-house counsel from some of that stuff. So, but there's a lot going on in the world.
There is. It's a lot. It's a very interesting. The profession is becoming very interesting, and some of the common elements I see with what some of the things you just mentioned are, a lot of those are bringing technology to the table. So as you know, obviously, I think accounting firms are much more tech savvy, I think I can say, than most law firms, and are used to interdisciplinary types of relationships to a greater degree. So I think that those things will change a lot. And I would suggest to in-house counsel that they try to learn as much about technology as they can and try to not be too tech averse, because I think it's coming to law, and on both the law firm side and the in-house counsel side. So I wanted to give you the opportunity. You had mentioned you might share a little bit more about what your company does and who your, you know, the types of clients you work with. So if you'd like to share anything like that,
Sure.
please do.
Always happy to talk about Exiger. So Exiger was founded by a number of experienced entrepreneurial executives who helped build other similar compliance companies. And they came to the table this time wanting to make a difference by applying technology early on and sort of creating a best practice financial crimes compliance firm based on everything they'd learned. So early on, technology was key to our vision for the future of the company, and being able to deal with large amounts of data and analyze it. And so we're a consulting firm where we have, you know, people like Dan Alonso, who were significant senior prosecutors in the past, but we also have technologists who know AI and have developed significant breakthroughs. And so that's a very interesting combination, because when you can marry the subject matter experts with excellent computer scientists, you really are on the road to doing something great. The company's origin is really interesting as well. Mike Cherkasky, our executive chair, was appointed as the global monitor of HSBC under a deferred prosecution agreement by the Department of Justice, and also in connection with the UK authorities. So right off the bat, instead of just focusing on that monitorship, which he well could have done, and running that through for several years, he decided with our CEO, Michael Bieber, to create a full-service consulting and technology firm. But the firm's basis was the ability to learn how to manage a global, huge independent monitorship. And that enabled the company to attract top flight talent and learn how to, you know, do these kinds of reviews in multiple offices and deal with a very large financial institution. I think that may be the largest independent monitorship ever. And the company's branched out to investigations and to due diligence manual reports, as I've noted, and AI that will help financial institutions do more efficiently the kind of KYC and other regulatory requirements work that took a lot of people in the past and probably was not as well done as it's going to be in the future. So we have quite a few large FI clients and corporate clients, and we've expanded very steadily over the last 5 years. And it really is a success story and the kind of job I always wanted when I thought about moving in-house, be there early enough to see how it happens, have an impact, see how the entrepreneurs really build a company. And it's fascinating.
Well,
I've
congratulations.
enjoyed it. Thank you.
Congratulations on your
Thank you.
personal success and the success of the business. I think that it's exciting when in-house lawyers have that opportunity to come into a fast-growing business and both contribute to and hopefully benefit from that growth. So I think that's fantastic. Just to wrap up, I love to talk about good and bad career advice people have gotten without naming names, especially on the bad advice side. But if you don't mind sharing, what's the best piece of career advice you've ever gotten, and maybe what's the worst piece of career advice you've ever gotten?
Somewhere along the line, somebody said to me, if you're at a point in your career and you're not really sure what to do next or what's logical or you're unhappy or whatever, talk to as many people as you can. Just ask people who are doing interesting things what they think about what you're doing, what their advice is. If you're interested in the field, people are usually willing to talk to you. It's really amazing, and one shouldn't be shy about that. The worst advice was basically I came from a non-legal, non-lawyer background. Most of my relatives were doctors or something like that, so they had no idea. But they knew, as most of them were fairly recent immigrants, that you should get some kind of profession, and you can do anything with a law degree. Well, you're going to be a lawyer if you get a law degree. So it's important to understand that. And make your peace of it or enjoy it. Find a way to enjoy it. And for me, in-house was a way to combine things that I thought were kind of exciting and interesting with being a lawyer and developing those tools in a useful way. By the way, I think what you're doing here with these interviews is a great idea.
Oh, thank you.
And it's great to have create a sort of knowledge base that didn't exist before for people who are thinking about going in-house or thinking about going to law school. This is really a great thing to do.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was a bit.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's been my pleasure. I want to thank you for participating, Steve. It's our hope. I was actually inspired a little bit by the sort of oral history projects that are done at some of the Smithsonian museums. If you've been to DC recently,
right.
Like the African American History Museum has a great oral history room where you can listen to the stories of people that dealt with even back in slavery, just post-slavery, there were interviews and other projects like that where passing on the knowledge is so important. And I think that's equally true in the professional realm, where especially in maybe a somewhat hidden corner of the corporate world where maybe, we could shed more light on the role of in-house counsel. I often tell people that in-house counsel are among the most important people in both the legal world and the business world, because they're the buy side of a very large industry, the legal industry, and they're also the most trusted advisors or among the most trusted advisors to the C-suite. So because they have that dual role, they have a unique importance in our economy, I think. So I think sharing this type of information is I hope it will be enormously helpful. And thank you, Steve. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future, I hope.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.